So Rebecca did a really great job of highlighting and summarizing the overall landscape, and I think my presentation will follow up that nicely, especially in regards to that question that we got about when will real-world evidence be approved. It's hard to say that the FDA is going to approve real-world evidence as it by itself, but it's kind of an ongoing moving target. So this presentation will hopefully address that a little bit. We're going to talk about how we're trying to affect that within PHUSE, and then at the end we'll talk a little bit about how everyone can help make that a reality. So real-world evidence and regulatory submissions. I kind of went with that, but you'll see how I kind of made some adjustments on the fly, especially with COVID-19 making a lot of things top of mind. So I wanted to take a step back and point out what is the point of everything that we're doing. The main point we want is bring life-changing medicines to patients, whether it's RCTs, whether real-world data and evidence can help us do that. That is the main part. We want to do it quick. We want to do it as safely as possible, but the patients ultimately need the medicines. So the regulations don't actually call for RCTs. They point out different problems to threats to validity. There could be biases, measurement error, confounding, and model misspecification. And that's true for trials as well as real-world evidence. And as Rebecca mentioned, that's one of the things that RCT duplicate is trying to address. So we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Rebecca also mentioned how Odyssey, there was an Odyssey presentation about what agreement might look like. And I highly encourage everyone to go search through Odyssey. I won't give you the direct link, not only because I don't have it in front of me, but because it's a great site to look around if you haven't been familiarized with that group yet. But they did a presentation about what is agreement, starting with the question of, do we need 50% to agree, 60% to agree, 90%? It's hard to even come down to what percentage of people need to agree on something for that to be the truth. When it comes to studies, we have confidence intervals, and sometimes the confidence intervals overlap. Sometimes they point in different directions. There's all kinds of different outcomes that are possible. So that's one of the questions that we need to address going forward. Again, this is applicable to trials as well as real-world data and evidence. So again, COVID-19 highlighting opportunities that I think real-world data and evidence can help us as a healthcare system be more agile in our response. Thinking about how are we going to get back to normal? They constantly give us a time frame, 12 to 18 months until we get a vaccine. Oftentimes it takes longer than that. Is it possible we do something different in these extreme times to get people back to normal more quickly? Flexible to the system. We obviously seen PPE shortages, ventilators. No one knows how much different areas need. How do we get them to where they're most needed? Things like real-world evidence and live data streams can help us be more flexible in our resource use. And personalized treatments. This is a well-known area of development where treatments are becoming more personalized down to DNA and biomarker level. So this is another area where the more information we have, the more up to date it is, the better we can help bring those life-changing medicines to our patients. And so what's been done before is we have regulatory, business, and open source, and I have them siloed here, but obviously there's work that goes on between the three of them. So within regulatory, we see the different laws and regulations, HIPAA, the 21st Century Cures Act, and the biggest benefit here is that it provides a unified structure, a unified goal for everyone to work within, and it's methodical. So that's a good thing, but it's a double-edged sword in a way that it can be slow. So again, back to that question, when will real-world evidence be approved? We don't really know. It's hard to say, but we know that once it is, it will be in the right way. So business like pharma and insurance, they're targeted. Each business has their specialty. They're working on what they have advantages and working towards, and they're focused on making it sustainable. How do we maintain profitability? We don't want malinvestment. We need to be able to have everyone put food on the tables. Some of the disadvantages here are you could have companies working on the same thing. Competition-wise, maybe whoever gets there first to market is obviously a big advantage. So you might have investment that is just wiped off because of patent laws, and they're silos. So it's hard to work together business to business unless there's legal contracts put in place. And so open source, like PHUSE and Odyssey, are very collaborative. They have varied approaches, so everyone's doing a lot of different things. So there's again the double-edged sword. We have a lot of duplicate effort, but with the varied approaches, everyone can try the method that they think is best. Might be harder to get some data on when you're open source, and a lot of the data that we use within a business is confidential. So there's different strengths and weaknesses to all three. So the question is, how do we get them to work together as best as possible? And so the way I'm thinking about this is we're living through the digital disruption of the pharmaceutical industry, which a lot of people have acknowledged and agree that we're sort of ripe for it. But because of a lot of the safety requirements, the expertise in the industry, the amount of money it takes to fund clinical trials, all these things create a pretty good natural and maybe some unnatural barriers to entry. But we're able to make this digital disruption ourselves. We're empowered to do this, and we have a lot of the tools coming online, big data, open source technology. We're working together. Everyone's collaborating. And so this is how our attempt differs, and it's a focus on bringing the three silos together. So we have a brand new team within PHUSE for real world data and evidence. And I've listed a bunch of the names on the side here: Andy Richardson, Lauren, and the PHUSE team. We have some FDA representation. Sangeeta is the co-lead along with myself. And the rest of the folks here were directly involved in writing the paper that, so that's the symbol at the center of these three silos here. We created a paper as our initial voyage into helping lead the industry forward and bring these regulations to light. And so what the paper does is goes over the definitions and brings a lot of resources into one place. So it has an appendix of FDA docs. It has privacy info for GDPR as well as HIPAA. And there's also 4 different case studies. A couple are a little bit of an overlap from Rebecca's presentation, but I'll just go over the 4 of them very briefly. So the first one is building a real-world clinical genomic database of patients with cancer. And so this is focused on bringing that personalized precision medicine to cancer patients. There's an RCT duplicate paper, which is from Aetion, and it highlights why RCT duplicate was created, the purpose of it. And so just to reiterate what Rebecca had said, it's about proving how real-world data and evidence can and is fit for purpose when used in the proper way and with the proper study design. And one of the things that I think RCT duplicate is great at, and is also true with the 4th case study, which I'll get to in a second, is that the more instances of agreement we can see. So again, back to that, what is agreement? If we have trials that come to a conclusion about a drug's efficacy and safety, we have real world data coming to the same conclusions, and we see it time and time again. That builds up people's confidence. That makes people think that, hey, if we can't get a trial right away, let's look at real world data to see how likely this is. And then a randomized trial is still going through the gold standard, but it helps build that confidence across the board. So 3rd case study we have in the paper is real world observational study, combining historic and ongoing medical records. And this is a target PBC ongoing 5-year study to provide info and treatment evaluation that isn't possible through your typical study. And so this goes back to the main cause of people of medicines not being effective in the real world is something like just taking your medications, adherence. So in the real world, if a medication is so hard to take for whatever reason that it's just not effective, that is something that we do want to know. Whether it's effective, scientifically or not, we need to know if the patients can actually follow through with that. So it is important to have both sides in agreement. So the fourth and final case study we have, which is one of the most exciting, and I could say that within Pfizer, we've seen some of the same lessons learned as this case study. So it is really important for anyone who's looking to use real-world evidence in support of a clinical submission. And so this final one is lessons learned from experience working with real-world evidence in regulatory submission, a Janssen study experience. And this was an oncology therapy that was shown to have low response for subjects with specific tumors and specific tumor biomarkers alterations, and being targeted using real-world matched clinical and genomic data sets. Patients with the disease and the predictive value of the specific tumor biomarker were explored. And so what this case study does is it includes lessons learned and examples for handling regulatory, privacy, propensity score matching, and a bunch of other scenarios that could come up while you're working with real world data and evidence to support your clinical submission. So in the future, I think Sangeeta and I both see this group growing, and this is, like I said, the initial white paper. It's meant to just bring resources together, show a little bit of the landscape, but in the future, I think we'll have more papers, more presentations and posters, proof of concepts, case studies. I would like to see even RCT duplicate, if there was some efforts in proving those case studies that were then displayed through this group. I think that's something we can do to help bring real world evidence further to approval, keeping in mind that real world evidence and open source, just by its nature, is close to technology. And so it's hard for regulation to keep up with technology. So it's going to be something that it's always going to be a work in progress. We might never get fully approved. It's just to spark some ideas. I think some of the future papers might include more experiences about getting approvals, different technologies. We're using big data, we're using cloud storage now, tools that we're using for that, best practices for how to handle real world data, how to handle some of that maybe there is some bias in how you handle that, how you handle missing data, how to properly handle inclusion exclusion, how to design studies, and even macros and packages that we're using. So why does this all matter? Back to the COVID theme. So R-naught, I'm sure we've all heard of it. It's how infectious something is. And so in this case, I'm using it for how infectious are these ideas. So it's a function of the infectious period, the contact rate, and the mode of transmission. So the infectious period is how energized we all are from the ideas that are being shared. Could also be affected by how powerful we think they are. The contact rate is how many people, obviously, you touch with the ideas, and the mode of transmission is, in this case, a presentation over the internet. There could be posters and papers that people read. And so all this becomes R-naught. And if it grows, so here's the exponential curve, what does it lead to? In this case, it's good things. We share ideas by breaking barriers. Again, credit to Odyssey for their work on what is agreement and showing how they do a lot of work towards showing that real world data is not biased when used properly, at least. Also credit to RCT duplicate. I think that's a really great effort, and we'll see some great results from there. Building bridges, that is sort of coming back to the FUSE group that we have, everyone working together, whether it's independent workers, people from industry, or and regulatory people coming together. We're all building bridges together. We're all working together. And that should spark more ideas, which ultimately leads to more tools like real-time analysis, personalized medicine, novel treatments. We're seeing things like hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin How can we figure out how effective and how safe those are without the lengthy clinical trials? Is there a way to do that in times like these, and where can that be used when we're not in an emergency? And again, back to the better inventory thing. I think there's still improvements we can make with how we source and how we move things around. One thing also with the real-time analysis, so it's hard to get the data for COVID analyses currently, and that's completely expected. It's for very good reasons, privacy being foremost concern. And so even when companies want to provide the data, we need to worry about how to de-identify the patients and keep everybody protected. So one concept we aren't really addressing here for another time maybe, but I would like to see something like maybe something like blockchain is the way to have real-time analysis where hospitals and insurance companies and everyone is just funneling data, at least certain data, into a blockchain, and blockchains are known for being anonymous and protecting identities. So again, I'm probably laying out a number of bad ideas, but hopefully they spark some good ideas that lead to future tools. And then, so in the future, we're hoping that this all leads to better outcomes, healthier patients, and a more robust, agile system. And if that is true, hopefully this graph is something that floats around during the next epidemic or pandemic. So we've all seen this graph, healthcare system capacity, what it looks like without protective measures. We go way over and leads to catastrophe. With protective measures, we still have to go through it, but it's spread out and we don't overwhelm the system. So I've added this third option, a real world data enabled response. And this is, in the ideal scenario where we know quickly and accurately if treatments like hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin are effective, if they're safe. We know quickly and accurately if the 7 to 8 different vaccines that have been identified as top contenders, if they're going to work. And all these things combined, there's also the second order effects that we see here. So healthcare system is one thing. Maybe with an RWD enabled response, we don't have to shut down the economy. So that's another hopeful aspect of the future I'm looking forward to. But that is it. Hopefully I've sparked some interest and some ideas. The PHUSE working group is always open. Welcome to new members. If there's any work and you're looking for a place to get it out to the public, we're more than happy to bring on new members. So thank you. Back to you, Chris.